it's there. Thank you, Jeremy.
Ready? Okay. Good evening. Thank you all for attending this study session to review the draft Economic Development Strategic Plan. This is an informal study session with council approval of the plan. The agenda is for July 31st. Nicole, would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'd like to introduce our Economic Development Consultant team and also members of the Economic Development Committee who are here this evening to present the draft strategic plan for your review and comment this evening. Again, our tentative intention is to bring this back to the council as part of your July 31st meeting for approval so we can begin implementation. In the draft strategic plan, you will find a number of goals that are intended to help us refocus back on economic development, dust off the topic, so to speak. We would consider this kind of a phase one of an approach to economic development. It's certainly a comprehensive plan. However, it may not go into the depth that's needed here in Albany. And as we continue to implement the plan, we will look at opportunities to go into more detail or perhaps additional study. The planning process began in January of this year, and it's been a quick and comprehensive process involving a number of stakeholders. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the chair of the Economic Development Committee, Robert Chasty, who's here to say a few words, and then we'll begin the presentation with our consultants.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll try to be short. I know that time is, we never have enough. So first, I'd like to thank the members of the committee, Alan Kane, Sean Charles, John Montaugh, Stephanie Sala, Elizabeth Baker, and Andrea Goldman. They worked hard. They did all this for free. They did it out of the love for the city and trying to see that we have an opportunity to improve our standing and our economic position. Albany is a city that could actually go out of existence. People think those things don't ever happen, but it's difficult for a city of this size without a large economic base to be able to maintain this level of services that we want as a city. And I think it's important for us to be able to help in any way possible to make that happen. I think we will survive, and one of the goals of this committee was to figure out how we could raise more revenue for the city. So there are no grand ideas in this report tonight. There's no one silver bullet. There's nothing that will resolve all of our problems. What there are a lot of ideas about how to improve many of the different things that we do in the city, and hopefully that will produce the result that we're looking for. I think that I'd like to thank the consultants, Amalia Cunningham, who worked in association with Ben Noble and David Greensfelders to produce this report. They worked hard, they looked at a lot of data, and they came up with what I consider reasonable recommendations. The biggest thing that's missing from this is the grand conversation that Albany has to have among its own residents, and that's whether or not we are willing to put up with accommodating larger businesses or businesses that need more space or businesses that need room to grow. And that would require, in addition to that, more business. And that would require that we change the zoning, that we have higher height limits, that we have more parking opportunities, that we have more density than we've had up till now. And that's a big decision for the city of Albany. We have a city that prides itself on being sort of an urban village in the middle of an urban area, and that we have it both ways. We have small, face-to-face, small-scale living, as well as all of the opportunities of a large urban area. And that's a different conversation, and it will take a lot longer than we have tonight. But with that, I'd like to turn over the presentation of this to Amalia Cunningham.
Thank you, Robert, for that introduction, and also Nicole for your remarks. I am Amalia Cunningham. I'm a planner. I've been the lead consultant on this project since January. I've been working with Ben Noble and David Greensfelder, who are both Albany residents, and it's been a pleasure, and we thank you for the opportunity to come tonight, share with you the results of our research and analysis, and have a discussion about the draft concepts and recommendations we've included. We know you've had the opportunity to read the full plan, which was included in your packet. I think there's probably copies back there for other folks who haven't had a chance to read it yet. So in this presentation, we're going to try to hit the highlights and leave as much time as possible for discussion and make sure that we get out any issues or concerns that are coming up. To recap for listeners who may not have been involved so far, this project originated out of the City Council's strategic plan. Economic development is important for generating new revenue to support public services provided by the city organization, and so it's been identified as a priority by the council. Albany's Volunteer Economic Development Committee, as chaired by Robert Chasty, has been the ongoing body involved in this project. And the EDC members, individually and collectively, have been extraordinarily helpful and generous with their time and participation, and we really appreciated their involvement. The public outreach process so far has included 2 focus groups for business representatives, one oriented to brokers and commercial property owners, and one for small businesses, as well as one-on-one interviews with the larger businesses in town. We held a public workshop in April to review preliminary concepts under our consideration and ran an online survey through the city's website. Individuals also submitted comments to me or to staff throughout the process. So all in all, we've had input so far from more than 100 citizens and more than 50 business representatives. So let's start with an overview of your business community. Albany has about 900 licensed businesses, and that means 900 businesses with an Albany address. Doesn't include residential property owners, doesn't include contractors coming in for a short term. 900 cited businesses here. That's a small size of a business community. Of course, you're a small community. In many cases, some of these licensed businesses are leaders in their industry, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about some of those later. Your local sales tax growth is about 7% year over year compared to the state and Bay Area average of 2%. So you're seeing some strong growth here relative to the region. Your top sales tax generators are pretty concentrated. Your top 25 generates about 75% of your revenue. So this is not necessarily something to be concerned about, but it is something to be aware about when we're talking about large tax revenue generators. One of the appendices in the reports has some details about how this compares to peer cities in the I-80 corridor. There's about 5,000 jobs in Albany, as discussed in detail in your general plan, which we used a lot throughout this process to build on. There's a workforce of about 10,000 employed residents. Significant public employment here, as you know, between the school district, the Department of Agriculture complex, UC Village, the city itself, and the Orientation Center for the Blind, as well as nonprofits like the YMCA. The school district forms the nucleus of the education industry cluster with 466 total employees. 101 of those are Albany residents. Including St. Mary's, Tilden Prep, and all the preschools brings your total education sector employment to at least 650 people, making it the largest employment industry. The Department of Agriculture campus is the largest single employment location, and to their credit, they do provide employee commute alternatives such as a BART shuttle and transit subsidies. And of course, Target and the racetrack are your largest private sector employers, and each of them has a seasonal bump. Target's at Christmas time, and the Golden Gate Fields has a seasonal bump during their race season, which is 148 days in a certain period of the year. A couple of your other larger employers have seasonal bumps during the summer when they ramp up for recreational hiring. We took a look at the industrial sector here, sometimes also called PDR, production, distribution, repair. That's the term the general plan uses a lot. There's about 56 firms with about 200 employees. It's a pretty small industrial sector, but those that are here are doing very well and they're very happy. I talked to a lot of them personally. They like their location. They like doing what they're doing. A lot of them have freeway access or freeway visibility, which works for their nature of their uses. They're doing well as far as tax revenue goes. We understand there are some community conversations about if or where or when the industrial area may be appropriate for more art or cannabis uses, and there's interest in both those user groups in Cleveland Street. And there's tax revenue implications for each of those types of uses, which we can talk about more if there's interest. Now, given that about a quarter of your licensed businesses are home-based businesses, we took a look there at what's going on in that sector. Of those home-based businesses, about half are professional services, which means consultants, accountants, lawyers, folks like that that are potential future office tenants where and if there's space. Of course, not everybody who has a home-based business is a full-time business. However, if they're serious enough to get a business license, I think they're serious enough to think about growing them, and we talk later about facilitating some cluster work within that sector. Now, to talk about the commercial real estate market findings that we've done over the course of the project, or the next two slides, I'd like to introduce David Greensfelder of Greensfelder Commercial Real Estate.
Hi, good evening. So, of the various commercial sectors, probably the most dominant is retail, followed by office, and after that, industrial. Albany has about 300,000 square feet of leasable space for retail, compared with about 100,000 for office. Both commodity and specialty retail do well. The difference between commodity and specialty being that commodity retail, commodities are things that are essentially the same regardless of where you buy them. So, you know, a cell phone would be an excellent example. It's really a trade-off between price and convenience. Do you need it now and you're willing to pay a premium to have it now, or are you willing to wait a few days or a week, and then you could end up having it for less if you're willing to wait. So trade-off between price and convenience. Specialty retail, conversely, is retail where the purchasing function is really about disposable income, disposable time, and more of an emotional attachment with the purchase. The community's focus has been augmenting specialty retail. However, I do want to point out that if one of the stated goals of this plan is to be exploring additional sales tax revenue to the city, that would seem to indicate that there should also be a focus on commodity retail, as the city's highest sales tax generators are commodity retailers. There are significant opportunities to foster an environment for both commodity and specialty retail, and in particular on specific stretches of San Pablo Avenue, and we propose that they would be specific nodes on San Pablo Avenue, and if things fill in between these nodes, fine, but be focusing on the nodes first and foremost. San Pablo Avenue's strength is that it is so pedestrian friendly, and one of the measures to me of being pedestrian friendly is how comfortable are you jaywalking. And Solano Avenue gets a good, healthy score for jaywalking. You don't feel like you're taking your life in your hands, hopping across the street to patronize a business on the other side of the street. San Pablo Avenue, conversely, doesn't do quite as well on that measure. So it's more auto-oriented. It's a wider street. There are higher speed limits. There are more buses on the street, more trucks on the street. So a little bit less friendly an environment for pedestrians. Interestingly, though, San Pablo has a high, has in some ways a very similar tenant mix to Solano Avenue in many ways. Also, retail should be focusing on active versus inactive uses. Active uses being uses that engage pedestrians as they walk by a site. So storefronts, even a karate studio, whereas inactive uses are really holes in the street. And, you know, one of probably the best examples, it's actually in Berkeley and not Albany, but the I think it's the Solano Apartments just above Kieran restaurant, same side of the street as Kieran. It's a half a block where there's actually nothing that engages you as you walk by. So it's a whole, we want to try to avoid that, particularly in the areas where we want to foster retail. Another key point that is that's worth stressing is that real estate in Albany can be difficult to develop. And we go into this in more detail in the report. Part of the reason is that our lot depths are very shallow. So it makes it very difficult to build product that both has enough scale to it to actually have financial economies of scale from a development perspective, but also to be at all auto-oriented. And when I say at all auto-oriented, I mean, can you turn a car around on the site just for purposes of being able to park? And we talk about that and maybe some ideas for how to approach that. The other thing is that Albany has notoriously small lot sizes, and this is an artifact of Albany having undergone an urban planning process that's probably well over 100 years old now. At a time when cars were a newfangled invention as opposed to, you know, how many of us live. So you'll see a picture in the report of the Safeway, which is by supermarket standards a small store, but it dwarfs every other business and commercial lot in the immediate vicinity, just to give you an idea of. So assembling a lot of those small lots in order to get enough space, again, to have economies of scale from development purposes or redevelopment purposes ends up becoming a barrier to having a new project development happen. And then finally, the city's recent parking study, not surprisingly, it found that there was no significant parking deficit. I think that you'll find that that is a matter of opinion from person to person in town, but also very difficult for the same reasons. Hard to turn a car around on a small lot. So and we don't like dead-end parking. So difficult to find opportunities for additional parking in town.
And Ben Noble is going to speak to our observations on the permit process here in town.
Thank you, Amalia. Again, my name is Ben Noble. I'm an Albany resident and a city and regional planning consultant with a home-based business specializing in development regulations and zoning codes. So we were asked to take a look at the city's permitting process as it relates to economic development goals. And this was an issue that was identified by the Economic Development Commission as something that's important to the business community, with some concerns about the permitting process within the city and how it may support or hinder economic development goals. So we took a look at this issue and began by talking to a variety of stakeholders, including local businesses, city staff. We had an online survey, we had a workshop, we took a look at the city's existing ordinances and regulations. And what we found is that the city of Albany is similar to a lot of other communities in that the city's doing a lot of very good things in order to be customer friendly and have an efficient, streamlined permitting process. But there's also opportunities for improvement as well. I think you have a city staff that's very dedicated and committed to customer service. And one of the recommendations that we have is that continue on with a more explicit statement identifying customer service as an important city priority when dealing with the public. We also found that there's the need for enhanced information sharing and communication between city departments and the business community. That there's quite a gap between the perception of city staff and the perception of a lot of business owners in terms of what's working and what's not working, which says to me that there needs to be more communication in terms of how the city can best meet the unique and special needs of the business community. So we have a number of recommendations within the plan having to do with surveys, more communication between the business community and the city. And then another issue has to do with performance metrics. So a best practice among many city governments is to identify specific goals in terms of how long it will take to issue certain types of permits, establish that as a performance metric, and then to over time evaluate the extent to which the city is achieving those performance metrics, and if not, how procedures can be adjusted to better achieve those objectives, which is something that I think city staff is doing now in a more informal way, and might be beneficial to formalize that a little bit more. So with that, I'll sort of conclude my comments about the permitting process and our observations, and if the council has more questions or interest in that during the discussion, I can answer questions at that time.
Thank you, Ben and David. So as you know, here at Albany, there's no one dedicated staff person, and the way that the city staff's economic development services came up as a discussion item among some of the stakeholders. Various departments do various pieces of the program, and the pieces get done, but there is a perception from Albany's business customers that so many people involved might be contributing to less coordination than one might otherwise expect from a small organization with a relatively small bureaucracy. And there is also no one staff person assigned to serve as an ombudsperson available as a liaison between businesses and City Hall when permit problems or other types of issues like that arise, or even better, proactively get involved to avert those kind of problems before they come up. And that function is one that EDC members have stated to us as an important service to provide the business community. And paying for this function and these types of services is a whole other story, and we've provided information in the report on potential new local revenue sources beyond the general fund. None of these funding options rose to the level of a recommendation at this time. People at the workshop did not feel engaged by any of our suggestions. When we talked about bids at stakeholders groups, that didn't really get a lot of traction. But I think the EDC is interested in continuing dialogue about future funding sources down the road. It just didn't quite coalesce in time for this plan. So I would like to briefly run through the goals and then get to discussion. We have 6 main goals, and each one is estimated a time frame and a cost. And this was a 5-year plan. So to that end, the short term is something that can be done in the next year. Midterm is within 3 years, and long term within 5 years. And low cost is something that can be done for less than $20,000, or in many cases for free. And mid-range is something for less than $100,000, and high cost is anything above that. So again, we're going to talk at a very high level now. The report has lots of details and each detailed action for these goals. So goal number 1 is capitalizing on the existing work of organizations like the Chamber and the Solano Avenue Association, bringing like-minded businesses together by forming clusters. Supporting activities can arise out of these facilitated clusters. For example, a multi-agency job fair, a home improvement expo. We wouldn't have those ideas come out of the clusters, though. The city has many resources which it could leverage to support those groups, such as event space, the rec guide, but this goal does not call for the city to staff these groups on an ongoing basis. We want to get the ball rolling and have them continue meeting to support their own interests. Goal number 2 is improving data collection and reporting. Ben alluded to this. We want to use it, centralize and organize the collection of data from a variety of data points, and then use it to do low-cost, high-impact actions like a business development webpage, small business training. Most of these actions depend on this formally identified point of contact staffer. And options how this position could work or be structured are included in the Appendix A of the report. Goal number 3 hones in on some existing strengths in specialty retail and quality restaurants, continuing to build that sector. Not intending to discourage other uses, particularly office. However, more square footage is currently available for retail and will likely be so in the foreseeable future. To that end, we recommend more frequent formal and informal communication with brokers and potential tenants, and an attraction campaign which could use some of the data that we have gathered in the course of this project. Ben is going to talk briefly about these 2 plenary items.
Right. So I think one of the big ideas in this document has to do with the future of San Pablo Avenue and the kind of proactive planning that the city could do to support the development that will be consistent with the vision for San Pablo Avenue and the city's economic development goals. So part of that has to do with this idea of some sort of area plan or specific plan being prepared for San Pablo Avenue, the relatively short distance of San Pablo Avenue that's within the city's boundaries. And it is, common for cities with an area like San Pablo to prepare a specific plan or a more detailed planning document to guide and prescribe the desired form of development and land uses. I think this is an issue that's going to warrant, I think, a lot more conversation and discussion from city staff and other stakeholders. The options are broad in terms of what the city could do if it's a priority to sort of update the planning documents for this area. As you know, you have existing design guidelines for San Pablo. I think they're a little bit out of date. They're not reflecting many of sort of the market trends as well as the vision for the area that's articulated in the general plan. With that existing document, I think there's the option for the city to do a very targeted, focused set of amendments to update and refresh that, which would be a relatively less expensive endeavor, as opposed to a more comprehensive, specific plan effort, which could be a much more extensive and expensive effort. So if taking a closer look at the policies and development standards for San Pablo is a priority for the city, I think there's a range of options that are available to prepare goals, policies, and regulations which really fit the city's vision for that area.
Okay, thank you. And our final goal for discussion tonight is aiming at improving customer service. We want to further enshrine it in administrative procedures, make informational materials more clear for your business customers. And we also suggest probably a more detailed review down the road of the business license process and fee structure. Revenue neutral, but with the intent of streamlining the process to, for example, let home-based businesses get an over-the-counter license and improve the quality of the data collection that you could be getting from your business licenses. We also recommend a marketing campaign to your residents around the service improvements already underway, such as the expedited permitting option, using some of your many satisfied business customers as examples. That is the brief overview of the project. We've condensed the content for time. We could say much more about a lot of other elements of it, but we want to pause for now and get to the discussion. Thank you for your attention to this, and thanks for the discussion that will come.
Thank you. So we'll begin with comments, questions from council. Okay. Nick, you want to start?
Sure. Are we doing comments and questions or just questions now?
Both, okay.
Both? You want to do both? Okay. So I'll start with questions here. Are you not, regarding the last recommendation, are you not recommending that we take our permit process online at this point?
We talk about that in the report. I think it's just not on the slide.
Oh, okay, great.
The sooner the better, and I believe staff is working on that.
Okay, excellent. That sounds good. And I think I read in the report, but tell me if I got it wrong, that we actually have a way to fast track permits, but people don't know about that. Is that true?
Jeff can probably speak to it more, but you do have an option.
Oh, okay.
I'm not familiar with this part of the report, so I'm not sure. We certainly do work with people to fast track. We don't do what a lot of other cities do, which is to charge higher fees for people to work overtime. So in most other cities, when you hear about a fast track program, what you're doing is you're paying overtime for a city employee. We don't do that. We certainly work with people to try to solve the problems and get their permits issued as quickly as possible, but we don't have that kind of a formal program.
But are there programs that cities do institute where you perhaps use a consultant, where you say, okay, for this much more money, we'll bring in a consultant or other hired guns to fast track a permit?
So yes, with respect to planning projects, that's been our practice for many years. UC Village project. Jeannie Eisberg has been someone who's been a consultant to the city to fast track that for quite a while. It took a long time, but because of her, it went faster than it would have otherwise.
I see. So it's a more an informal program on a project-by-project basis where you decide, okay, we probably need to bring in someone to fast track this one versus that one.
So in the building permit stage of projects, historically, the city has always used consultants. We don't have, except for a period of time a couple of years ago where we had a staff person. But what we've found most successful is to use outside consultants, and they're busy. I can't say that we're entirely thrilled with the speed of their service, but that is the reality of the economy right now. Is that it takes a few weeks for a consultant, to review a set of plans that comes in.
Thank you. That's it for questions. So if I'm doing comments now, I'll try to keep them brief because I think we want to hear from the public more than us pontificating up here so much. But I want to say thank you. Great work on the report. I was very pleased with it. I thought there's a lot of good data-driven stuff in it, and I was very happy. I read it cover to cover, and actually sat with or had a phone conversation with Amalia to give her some of my very specific feedback about sections of the document. So let me just highlight a few things here where maybe I differ from what the document says. The one thing I'll note, one of the first comments I made was there's a section of the document that says the school district was unable to find 7,500 available contiguous square feet for its headquarters. I want to note for everyone's benefit that the school district owns, I believe, the land between Cornell and what's the other street, along Solano, that it could redevelop for its headquarters. That's where the Y building is, and a kind of an empty parcel where there might be a little play structure. So I would love to see the school district step up and develop that land. But moving on, I think that I would love to hear the mention of the area plan or the specific plan. This is something, as if people don't know, that El Cerrito has done. And as far as I can tell, that it is, now we're in competition with El Cerrito. They are fast-tracking developments, and I read in our local paper all the time about the next thing that is being planned for El Cerrito, and so I think that they're now ahead of us in the game, and I think if we don't do something like an area plan or a specific plan, which very simply just kind of fast tracks the process for developers, that we're going to start falling behind anyway because El Cerrito has stepped up in this way. So I think it behooves us. It might be a big upfront cost, but I think that's going to really behoove us to do that. I just got to mention that when people mentioned active versus inactive use, we've created, unfortunately, a piece of inactive space with the UC development with the side of the Sprouts store, which faces the San Pablo Avenue. When I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission when we were talking about that, and we actually got to the Sprouts store to reorient themselves a little bit, so there was less inactive space. But that is another example of where something we don't want to do in the future. We want to have, and Susan Moffett points out, I think that people activate a space. People walking make a space more interesting, more appealing, more comfortable, more safe feeling. You want active spaces as much as possible. And so 2 more points as briefly as I can. Mr. Chasty mentioned more density. I'd say, yeah, I believe the people of Albany want it, and I believe that they showed that they want it by passing Measure N, I believe, which was the parking reform we had on the ballot in November. And I believe that they believe what I believe, which is that we can't not evolve as a city. We cannot stay. We cannot have the status quo and not grow while everything around us is growing. But we have the ability to grow. We have the ability to plan and say how we're going to grow. But grow and I think and evolve and take in more retail and more housing is something I believe we must do. And finally, I think the thing that really is my biggest beef with the report, which in general, again, I want to point out is great, is is not the emphasis on parking, but some of the conclusions about parking. I think the conclusions about parking are putting the cart before the horse. When we say that the parking survey says we have no problem with parking in Albany. When we say that that's a matter of opinion, it's not. We did a survey, that's data, that's factual data. We do not have a parking problem in Albany, certainly not compared to our surrounding cities. And if you want to take commodity retail is one thing. People need to park at their grocery stores. But take the example of specialty retail, where people go to restaurants and that sort of thing. Do people go to 4th Street and park 3 blocks away and pay and then walk 3 blocks to 4th Street? Yes, they do. Do people go to downtown Berkeley and pay a lot of money to park in a parking garage or circle the block for hours and hours and park and still go to downtown Berkeley? Yes, they do. So I don't think the parking is the problem. We need to address parking, but it's something that we deal with because we have the problem of having a really good business district that people want to go to. And then it's going to fill up with cars, and then we deal with the parking problem. We don't address the fact that our business district might not be as vibrant by putting in more parking. The studies show, the data show that the way to deal with parking is you put a price on it that allows parking spaces to be freed up all the time. It allows there to be some parking spaces freed up all the time so that people who want to go and park can park and maybe pay a premium to do so. But that's how you deal with the parking problem. So, I'd say that people say that there's 2 certainties in life, death and taxes. I think I got that wrong. I'd say there's 3 certainties: death and taxes and people complaining about parking. People will complain no matter what. No matter what the situation, how good, how bad it is, people will complain unless they find themselves in a movie where miraculously they can pull up to wherever they're going and park right in front of it. That's the only time that happens, that people can do that. And actually, in Albany, people can do that. I can do that sometimes. There's not a parking problem there. So I'll get off my soapbox now and hand it over to someone else.
Okay, thank you. Rochelle?
Yeah, I'd like to second the thanks for the quality of the report. I thought it was very interesting, and look forward to hearing what the public has to say about it. I'll just touch on one quick thing, and that is a personal perspective and quirk. I'm a great fan of sort of building the sense of place and looking at a street almost as if it were an outdoor room. And I love the fact that the parklet is being worked on. I'd love to see a way to offer opportunities for local artists to exhibit their work along Solano Avenue. Just create a sense of Albany as a creative place, and I'm focusing on Solano here, San Pablo being a different set of circumstances, but for Solano at least, I think there are a lot of opportunities for creating more of a sense of place, more of a sense of creative community. Thank you.
Michael, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I want to make 4 broad comments because I want to have hopefully people who, from the committees and who wrote the report to respond to these. So first of all, I detected a little bit of tension in one of the reports. And let me just say this, when people go to Paris, no one goes to Paris and says, they designed the city before there were cars, and it's just so hard to drive around Paris. I don't know why anyone goes there. So perhaps the fact that Albany was laid out as a town pre the post-war suburban model of development could be a strength for us going forward, because we already have kind of an intense, concentrated little shopping districts in a town. And to follow up on what Nick and Rochelle said, it's almost like with cars, we have sort of a demographic transition, like when poor countries start to develop. First, their population skyrockets because kids aren't dying so much anymore. But then as you get women educated and whatnot, the population kind of drops back down. So I'd like to hope that maybe we're going through some kind of demographic transition with cars in Albany, that if it's an attractive city, more and more people want to drive here. But if you increase your density along your commercial corridors to the point that it really, really is attractive for pedestrians, then the parking problem tends to diminish over time. Maybe you think I'm wrong, but if so, please say so. All right. Traditionally, in regional economic development models, there's this concept of, high multiplier type economic activities. For example, if you open a new restaurant in Albany, it might bring in new business to the city that otherwise would not be in the city. Say it's a destination restaurant. And that's good because that brings new money into the city. If, on the other hand, you open up a new restaurant and it just steals customers from other restaurants in Albany, then you're not having a new net impact. You're not injecting new money into your regional economy. So I think that's an interesting concept when we think about business development. How do we get this kind of what the regional planning people call high multiplier economic development, as opposed to a business that just robs, customers from other businesses. And the classic example of this is sports stadiums. Everyone, or the pro-development people who do sports stadiums talk about how much, employment it's going to create, blah, 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 blah. But all the serious analyses at the statewide level say these big public-private sports stadiums just rob Peter to pay Paul, that they take money away from other sporting activities that otherwise exist in the state, and they end up not being a very good public investment at all. Witness what happens to most Olympic stadiums 5 or 10 years after the Olympics are over. Here's just a quick observation. I went on a bike ride the other day in Sonoma County, and there was a woman riding the bike, and I was talking to her about why she was here. She's a new member of the club, and she says, "Oh, I can work anywhere in the country. I just do analysis for an insurance company." And I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and I thought I'd just decide to move to Sonoma. And I thought to myself, wow, if it is the case, hypothetically, that some skilled people have jobs that allow them to have that much mobility. And let's just take that person, for example, who I was riding bikes with. How do we get her to move to Albany from Santa Rosa? And do we really have the amenities in place that would attract those kind of folks? And I was going to invite her to come for a bike ride in the Berkeley Hills. So, we'll see what she thinks. But, and then now more concrete comment. We've done a lot of work on San Pablo already in the complete streets planning process. I don't know, this is a real question, I'm not being rhetorical. Was the complete streets process integrated into your folks thinking about San Pablo? And also, the constraint we have with San Pablo, we don't have with Solano, with San Pablo is a state highway. And how did, dealing with our favorite local bureaucracy, Caltrans, how did that, or going forward rather, how would that affect just what we can do on San Pablo?
So we did in our talks with city staff talk about the project underway, but we have not reviewed the plans, whatever designs there are to date, so we could certainly do that and incorporate it. And the fact that it is a state highway does affect what happens curb to curb, but there still leaves quite a bit of scope for placemaking. Did you want to add something?
I think our attention was primarily on the private realm in terms of the development standards, regulations, and guidelines that apply to new property, less so on the public realm in terms of what could happen within the public right-of-way.
Okay, I'm just going to add a couple of comments and then open it up. I think I like the idea of the San Pablo specific plan. I think, El Cerrito's done some good work there. We can do good work on our own to, as Nick says, not let them get too far ahead of us. I think I like the idea of more art, whether it's simply on the avenues or the art district or broadening it out in other parts of the city. I think that's important. I think the one thing that's really important is we look at all this, and this is all really good, and then we put it on the shelf with all of our other plans, of which, we have millions. I think we really need to focus on this report and how to move it forward and how to sort of keep this momentum going and to be really bold in what we do moving forward. And I think Mr. Tracy made some good points about density and the zoning and taking some real concrete steps to get some things accomplished and stop talking about them and actually do them. And I think that's sort of where we are now, and so we need to keep going forward. And with that, I will open it up to the public. And with that, I'll adjourn the meeting. Come on.
Hi, I'm Amy Smolens, Albany Strollers and Rollers. We're the bicycle, pedestrian, and service and advocacy group here in Albany. City staff, council and mayor, consultants, economic development committee, thanks for doing this. I've lived in Albany for 31 years, and I really look forward to improved economic development here. I was gratified to read at the beginning. I looked at a lot of the plan online, and in the beginning it said that you reviewed and incorporated the active transportation plan and the climate action plan into this strategic plan. Also, you indicated when you were kind of characterizing the individuals who live here, you indicated that 30% of the Albany residents are urban chic, likely to commute by bike, and the trendsetters in the 3-mile radius, many don't have a car. And some of the comments do mention bikeability and bike parking as a priority for a business district. But the plan mentions wayfinding signage for bikes and pedestrians, but it doesn't mention bike parking at all when people actually get to their destinations. You address motor vehicle parking and delivery, but again, nothing about a very simple way to improve parking for businesses and ability for people to be where they're going and not worry about paying for those bike spots, the parking spots right in front of the location, bike parking. Now, the second indicator of Goal 3 of Albany's active transportation plan says 1 biking park for every 2 car parking spaces by 2015, which obviously hasn't happened, but Action B under Policy 3.2 is to, quote, identify and install bicycle parking in priority locations such as along Solano Avenue and San Pablo Avenue. Albany Strollers and Rollers has been helping the city meet its own adopted goals to provide that bike parking, but we still have a long way to go. And if there are going to be more businesses, we'll need more bike parking. Our organization has managed and organized it and led funding and fulfilled the purchase and installation of 52 bike racks. You've seen them, probably seen them around town if you walked on Solano. The racks look like bicycles. Yeah, so those accommodate 4 bikes per rack. There's still 4 more ready to be installed. So we're responsible for more than 200 bike parking spots in the business district. And the way we've done that is we've worked with the Solano Avenue Association and the Chamber of Commerce identifying those particular businesses. And the businesses have determined they wanted parking for their staff, students, clients, customers, patients, and they've cost shared with us. So that's bringing bike parking, bringing customer parking, client parking, staff parking, exactly where it's needed. So by doing that, that's ensuring that the bike parking is used. We're providing bike parking not randomly, but exactly where it's needed. And you can, I'll open up my computer and show you lots of photos. You can go to my Facebook page and look at literally hundreds of photos of those bicycle racks full of bikes, including trailers people use shopping, extra cycles, things of that sort. If you all, and it also lends vitality. Those racks are attractive and make the business district look nice and attractive. You see people just kind of gravitating, and kids gravitating to those racks. A lot of research shows that people that bike spend more locally. I can give you the link to that if you want. It shows statistics from all over North America. And David was pointing to active retail, and you notice the bike parking that creates, the active retail goes along with the bike parking right in front of the location. And before you say, oh, well, if you're buying a futon, you can't bike there, you're right. If you're buying a futon, you can't bike there. But if you're buying a futon and the person at Mr. Dewey's has biked there and the person at Royal Ground has biked there, that's freeing up a spot in front of the futon shop for you. So it really does create spaces for everybody. It also serves to reduce our greenhouse gas pollution because the more people that bike, the less traffic there is, period, and the less congested Solano and San Pablo are. Outside of Safeway, we have no bike corrals. And if you've gone to Piedmont Avenue, which is very similar to Solano, and Piedmont, which is very similar to Albany, they've got bike corrals on Piedmont Avenue. And that's something that we could look at to give some high-quality bike parking in front of businesses. So if you build it, we'll come. So I hope you'll incorporate bike parking into a way to enhance our economic development. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak?
Hi, good evening. I'm Peter Goodman. I'm currently the chair of the Albany Arts Committee, and so naturally I'd like to talk just a little bit about art as a driver of economic development, following on what Councilmember Nason said, Mayor McQuaid said about art in the city. I noticed in the report that it was reported that some of the larger developers felt that this public art assessment, which you had, I think is 2%. I don't know if you fixed it. It should be 1.75%. That's the accurate number. That they felt that that was burdensome. a punishment or a price that they have to pay grudgingly just to be able to build in Albany. And I'm just here to say that that's really not the case. Art and development in Albany should not be considered just an afterthought or some kind of decoration that is, stuck there. It's really an integral part of the space. The space is built in the space that evolves. But I know we're talking about revenue, so I just wanted to suggest a couple ways that art and revenue might be related. One thing, if you're talking about attracting different kinds of businesses, art galleries, they sell art, they produce sales tax, they have receptions, they draw large amounts of people there at one time. They spill out, and those people have to eat. They like to drink afterwards. So they really are, and a lot of the artists who exhibit at art galleries are not necessarily from Albany. They have friends. It's a way of bringing a lot of people in at one time to our city who perhaps had not been there before. Another thing about art spaces, there are empty lots, there are empty buildings. A lot of those could be repurposed, not necessarily on a permanent basis, but on a temporary basis as a way of having art galleries, art shows. I understand there are some maybe insurance considerations. The property owners need to be spoken with. But there are a lot of ways of using art to generate interest, to hide blight, to dress up the avenue and make it more attractive. One of the things that I would love to suggest is that at some point, if the opportunity presents itself, the city think about acquiring an area like the width of a normal storefront and convert that into an actual active art space that could be a staging ground for music, for poetry, for theater, a way of bringing in diverse crowds depending on what kind of music you play. You have different sorts of people come, so you could really attract a lot of different people with a single space. People know it's a place to gather. It would liven up the space and draw people at all hours of the day, and you could target it. You could make it part of city promotion, commercial promotion, et cetera, work with the merchants to develop special events on that space. It would be a great addition either to San Pablo or to Solano. I understand also that there's been talk about work-live environments, looking for apartments that could be reconverted for artists. Either as a space to just live in as a kind of an artist colony, or as a place where they could have a foundry or a studio on the lower floor and then live up above. Those are opportunities that might present itself. I think the whole idea of having art in the city is to, as numerous people have said, is to make Albany feel like, as Councilmember Barnes was saying, that Albany is a place that you could move to and live to, and there'd be not just the amenities, but there'd be the level of cultural sophistication that professional people might be looking for, some way of enhancing their lives, creating a kind of appealing to a very desirable demographic. The Albany Arts Committee would love to work with the Economic Development Committee to investigate some of these ideas. But the point I really want to make tonight is that art, among many other things, really needs to be at the forefront of the developers in the city's minds when they're looking for projects and thinking about how to develop projects, not as an afterthought, not as a punishment, and not as something that is like buried that they don't even find out about until they're well into their permitting stage. So I just appreciate everyone keeping that in mind. And also, I thought this report was wonderfully readable, and I really appreciated that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak? Ken?
Good evening, Ken McCroskey. A lot has been positively said about the report, so I won't repeat all that, but I agree. I think in the conversation this evening, there's an opportunity has come up. There's a blank wall at Sprouts. There's an interest in displaying art. Looks like an opportunity. I want to respond to some of the parking comments and touch on some what Councilmember Pilch was talking about earlier. We have a parking survey. In fact, it's coming up so often, I really recommend that when you have your meeting on the 31st, you actually attach that report along with this one so that it can be referred to. I think that would be very constructive. As a longtime traffic and safety commissioner, we've looked at parking, we've looked at what other cities do, we've looked at some of the things that other cities have found. For example, I can't speak to exactly what happens in Albany, but in Berkeley, they found that when they had timed parking, often it was the people who worked in the retail shops who were parking in the spaces and moving their cars, and a very high percentage of workers were parking in those spots and taking them up. In Albany, if you park at 4:30 or later, you can park all night on Solano. There's no enforcement after 6. That doesn't really support turnover for our restaurants. As the parking survey says, that there are a lot of people who come to Solano Avenue on foot or by bicycle, a significant proportion. And I think it bears looking carefully at the balance, at the tools we have in terms of timing or parking meters, if necessary. I'm sorry, there are people who've promised to really raise a ruckus if we start talking about those. A lot of tools we can use, so that bears a separate looking at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Brian Parsley, Albany resident. I actually wasn't going to come here and talk about this, but this is so interesting that I figured I'd get up and give it a shot. One of the issues, I think, and I've talked to Alan about this many times with regards to economic development in Albany, is there has to be something here that people want to come to. And while we have some very good businesses, we have a lot of redundant businesses. We have I think we all know about the situation about the nail salons. That's kind of now in a tie with coffee shops. And not that those aren't wonderful, but we do need a little bit more diverse businesses. Unfortunately, that is the difficulty, because you have to have somebody that wants to start a business. The issue with parking, I think, is significant. I think the bicycle racks that Strollers and Rollers in the city have done have been amazing. But there's going to come a time, and I think we're going to have to start talking about parking meters or other issues. It's one of the many third rails in the city of Albany, but I think my family and I spend a significant amount of our weekends in Alameda on Park Street, because frankly, it's fun. And when I go there to park, there is a public parking garage. It's fantastic. It's like 3 stories. It's hooked up to the theater. It's very simple. And they have on-street parking via meter. And it's not the end of the world. But they do have a diverse number of businesses. A major toy store. They have an arcade there. They have things for not only children, but teenagers and adults. And I think that's what we need to start to look at. We have that we have 2 business districts somewhat competing for one another. But I think that there is enough diversity out there that we can start, hopefully start attracting different businesses. I mean, we're a city that has an amazing amount of children and teens, which I'm sure we'll be talking about later. And I think that we need to attract businesses that will represent those groups of people. And restaurants are wonderful, but I mean, it's not always convenient to go to a restaurant in Albany. But I think that the key is to somehow attract diverse businesses the key is working with property owners to make rents somewhat reasonable, because you're not going to be able to get businesses in the current market in Albany. And I think you're seeing that in a lot of vacancies on Solano Avenue. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, I will bring it back to council. Any final, just a reminder, this is just a study session. We'll have more dialogue during our next council meeting or whenever it's agendized next. Any final words?
Sure. I don't have to go first, but I'll go ahead. All right, just a few things that I didn't mention in the beginning. I appreciate the comments of my council members. I agree with them. I think that I really appreciated Councilmember Barnes's comment about the fact that since we do have this city that has grown organically, without the thinking about how we have to accommodate cars, we do have something unique that a lot of cities don't have. There are tons of cities in the Bay Area that don't really have a downtown or anything that feels like a downtown, and we do. And I think that's a big asset for it, and already asset for us, and already that's something that I believe attracts businesses and will continue to attract businesses. So that's great. I appreciate the mayor's comments about us not shelving this and making sure that we act on these, act on this plan and move forward and actually implement the plan, and that we be really bold. And I think as the council, we have to get the community input. We have to try to get the community support. We have to have community hearings, but we also have to do what's right, what we believe is right for the city, and keep the city alive, as someone has said. We don't want the city to have a problem with bringing in revenue or to go bankrupt. We need to continue to evolve, as I said earlier. Sorry, I'm trying to pick out little comments from things I've already said. I don't think I have anything big to add at this point, so I'll pass the mic.
No, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Michael?
No, I would like to follow up on a comment that Brian Parsley made, and maybe to direct this to Alan or someone at the Solano Association. You know, there is some kind of odd market failure going on when, and I want to bring this up because we've talked a lot on the council about residential rents and rent review, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't talked much about commercial rents. And there's a market failure because there appear to be people, landowners on Solano, that want so much rent that no one wants to open a business there. And it seems like there's a trade-off between wanting to charge a high rent but having your space remain empty, making zero rent. And there ought to be some market forces that make the owner reevaluate and offer that space for a lower rent. And I drove by a great example today, which is the space on the southwest corner of Calusa and Solano, which used to be La Farine Bakery, which was a great business. People loved it. It was always busy. It went out of business. It's a corner. It's got lots of glass. It seems like an ideal business spot, but it's sat empty for months. And I sort of wonder, what's the problem with that spot? Why isn't another business going in there? And I just find it puzzling, but there's some kind of informational failure or something going on that I don't understand, and maybe as part of our economic development challenge, we should try to understand this problem better.
Yes.
Well, without addressing this comment to that particular landowner, I will say that having been in commercial real estate for 30 years, there are landowners out there who are nuts. I will also tell you, I will also tell you that real estate economics does play into this. I originally started in corporate finance and then very quickly switched to real estate economics. But in corporate finance, none of us could understand exactly what you're saying. Why would somebody keep an office building vacant when they could have some income from lower paying users? And the answer is that if the building cost $20 million to build and you needed $2 million a year of income in order to pay the mortgage, and you had an interest reserve from your bank, it gave you time to lease the building up. But if you only had $1.5 million in income, you're going to end up defaulting on your mortgage. So there are also real estate economics reasons why some spaces might stay vacant. In the case of La Farine, restaurant users pay the most rent. They're the highest rent payer that you're going to find for a space like that. Berkeley has a quota system for how much restaurant space there can be. La Farine was a little bit of an act of God to get that approved. The owners of the building, I think, recently got that use extended a little bit. So it may be rational for them to leave it open in order to find the right sort of restaurant use to go in there, which will ultimately make their building more valuable in the long run, as opposed to having the short-term gain of what they consider to be the wrong tenant in the space paying not enough rent. So there, but I will tell you that there are absolutely oddities. There's another space, and not to implicate the owner, on Solano Avenue, between the Alameda and San Pablo, where you call on the sign and the owner wants owner really literally wants the name and social security numbers of your children before she'll even answer a question of how much rent she wants for the building. So, I mean, there are people who fall into the original category that I mentioned. That is a reality.
Could I, before you sit down, could I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
Some of us are activists for modifications to Prop 13, and with the probably highest priority being modifying the commercial
split roll tax.
Prop 13, yes. I'm curious whether you would see that as having a negative impact on our business districts, or a positive impact, or just whether you think that would have a major impact on our retail life in California.
Is this being broadcast live? I think I need to take the fifth on that one.
Okay, I'll take you to one of our coffee shops or nail salons, and you can fill me in on your thinking.
The answer to your question is that if you have a split roll tax, which for those who might not know the lingo, the idea is that residences would still be subject to the cap, but commercial property would be assessed at market. So you might see some commercial properties that, for example, had been owned by a family or a trust for decades who, that has a very low tax basis. The tax basis would, boom, come up to market, and it could be very helpful to the state's finances. That doesn't necessarily mean that demand for space changes. So from a property owner's perspective, where there is a pretty big elasticity of demand, they're probably going to feel unfavorably inclined towards the split roll tax. Whereas conversely, if you have a piece of property where there is, where there's very high demand, low elasticity, very high demand, you might find that those property owners, and particularly retail tends to be leased on a triple net basis. So the maintenance, insurance, and taxes are all passed through to the tenants. They might be more agnostic about it. So I think it has to do primarily with, again, two things in summary. One, elasticity of demand and whether those additional taxes are going to be pushed onto the tenant or onto the owner. And secondly, whether the property is in an area or of a type that would tend to be leased on a net or a gross basis.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'd be delighted to talk with you about it at coffee.
Thank you.
Okay, just to summarize, this will come back to us for approval. And then I have a question about the next steps. There's a lot of things here. I'm sure we all have things we're particularly interested in seeing happen sooner rather than later. How's the prioritization part going to work, and how do we move this forward?
Right. Similar to the city's climate action plan, staff will develop an implementation plan that we review with the Economic Development Committee. Ideally, it will task the committee with some of the to-dos as it's fitting for the committee to work in that capacity. Otherwise, it will be at the staff level. Some of that can be implemented now, as we indicated with the short-term, mid-term, and long-term. Some of it will take some budget planning. So that will be a public document implementation plan once it's reviewed through the Economic Development Committee.
Great, thank you. And with that, we will...
Could just one more. Actually, David, could I ask you one more question? I appreciate your candor, by the way. That was very fun to hear.
I'm just thinking the ratings are probably lower than Madam Secretary, so I'm safe.
So I also appreciate a member of the public, I think it was Mr. Chase, that actually mentioned perhaps one of the bold things we might have to do is reconsider zoning and height limits. Do you, and I realize now I'm giving you another kind of loaded question, but or maybe difficult question. What would be the effect on rezoning and or height limits to the viability or to the business climate in Albany or to commercial real estate or development or redevelopment, in your opinion?
Yeah, I've got to say that the answer to that's definitely yes. There would be an impact. So I think I've got to go back to being able to the conversation about being able to assemble enough surface area. And so, as much as we're, perhaps moving into a post-internal combustion engine age, or, at the beginnings of that, I still think that we're going to find ourselves, whether it's a sharing economy, heavily car dependent, even in areas that are fairly highly urbanized like ours. That tells me that cars are still going to need to be taken into account as we look at development. And there certainly has been a lot of conversation about parking. I don't think that this is a situation like downtown Los Angeles or downtown San Francisco where parking is actually discouraged as part of the development of high-rises to force people to take public transportation. We don't necessarily have the kind of demand that would allow that sort of a strategy to work. So cars are here at least for the short to medium term. If that's the case, then we need to be thinking about how to accommodate cars in projects, and at least to some degree. And I'm not making a comment about, I'm just thinking practically here, not politically. If we're going to do that, you need to actually be able to turn a car around. Because people get cranky when they drive cars into dead ends and suddenly need to do a 20-point turn in order to get their car out. And as we all know, some people are better at the 20-point turn than others. So you need to assemble enough space for a larger project in order to, enough space to be able to get a car to turn around. Now, if you're talking about and the reason I'm focused in on the larger project is that I don't think you're going up 4 or 5 stories on something, on a lot the size that one of our houses is on, even one of the larger lots that one of our houses might be on. I mean, you're really talking about larger sorts of developments that I'm assuming might be on San Pablo Avenue or Lower Solano or something like that. So I think that this really, so this gets into a comment, and I think that you actually made the comment about competing with El Cerrito. And I think that I look at the competition with El Cerrito being a little bit different. El Cerrito did a lot of planning about how San Pablo Avenue should develop. They've gone to a higher level than we have gone to, and they're now beginning to see the fruits of that labor. And there could be, as part of a similar planning exercise, we could be addressing the question about whether we want to encourage the assemblage of lots in order to support the kinds of density, in order to encourage projects with the kind of density that would then encourage assemblages, which would then allow cars to be accommodated. And I know there are going to be people out there who are going to be saying, "Oh my God, he just talked about cars. That's all he talked about. That's all he talked about." But that is, that's, you got to be able to. That's, you're always looking as you're doing planning for what is the limiting factor. And that's the limiting factor, is can I get it in and back out again? And so I'm sorry if that's been a little bit of a ramble, but does that begin to address your question a little bit?
I think so. I mean, I think I heard you say that we could incorporate potentially changes in zoning, height limits, and other things into a plan that would increase the viability for businesses or redevelopment to happen here.
You know what? I think a really good way of summarizing it is that the conversations about all of those things at the end of the day merge. So you got to talk about all of them together in order to come up with, I think, the best possible answers for a local application.
And I think we need to talk about all of them at a later date.
You want a break?
I think we all want a break. Okay, so we'll be back in 5 minutes. I'd like to call to order the Albany City Council meeting for July 17th, 2017. Vice Mayor Pilch will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May we have a roll call, please?
Here.
Councilmember Moss is absent. Councilmember Nason is here. Vice Mayor Pilch.
Here.
Mayor McQuaid.
Here. Okay, report on action taken in closed session. Council gave staff direction on how to proceed on the closed session item. Just as a little piece of housekeeping, if you are here for the presentation by CESP on sea level rise, it has been postponed to a date uncertain. Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. Do any council members wish to pull an item? Seeing no one, is there anyone in the public that wishes to pull an item? Seeing no one?
I will move the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Councilmember.
This is not the time, thank you. That's fine. Just look at there.
Councilmember Barnes.
Yes.
Councilmember Moss. Councilmember Nason.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch.
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid.
Yes, and the motion carries. Okay, good of the city. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I believe that some of you are here with concerns regarding the proposed changes to the school crossing guard program. Unfortunately, this is not on tonight's agenda. So you're welcome to state your views on any item not on the agenda during good of the city, but discussion of off-agenda topics by members of the City Council are prohibited by the Brown Act. With this in mind, the crossing guard program will be on the July 31st City Council agenda, giving Council the opportunity to hear from the community and more fully explore our, explore our options, including traffic calming, driver education, volunteer opportunities for school, and volunteer opportunities for community members at or near our elementary schools. The good of the city is a time for persons desiring to address the City Council on an item that is not on the agenda. Please note the city policy limits each speaker to 3 minutes. Brown Act limits the council's ability to take and or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda. Could I please see a hand of all those who wish to speak on anything not on the agenda? I'm going to reduce it to 2 minutes tonight. Please try not to repeat previous speakers, but rather agree and make new points or simply agree. And I also want to remind you of our rules of decorum. Be respectful of each speaker, address the council and not the audience, and please no applauding or negative comments or noise. We want everyone to feel comfortable speaking and not to be intimidated by audience comments or reactions. Do you have speaker cards?
Yes.
All right.
I have Vanessa Martin, Jeremiah, and if anyone would like to speak, please fill out the speaker card in the back of the room and bring them up as you're called up or line up.
Is it Vanessa, come on up.
Okay, I'm going to cut this short. Mayor McQuaid, members of the City Council, thank you very much for listening to us talk about this a little bit early, so just thanks for that. I'll keep it brief. I moved to Albany for better schools, for walkability, for my family, for the diversity, for this amazing community. I've had the good fortune to walk my kids to school for the last 2 years, and I have seen the good and the bad. I have seen near misses. I have seen an actual hit and run. I live on Cornell. I walk across Solano, San Pablo, Jackson, and Buchanan to get my kids to school in the morning. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't thank Doug and Beverly for the job that they do. It's dangerous. I wouldn't have kids doing that. And I think you guys know that. I think we're all on the same page. So I just want to talk about solutions. I don't have any. I think, here's what I think, is that we need to come up with some kind of stopgap. It's going to take time to figure out funding from the university or other means. If there's an emergency fund, to me, to my family, this constitutes an emergency. So I would love to learn more about how we might do that as we sort out the funding. I also propose that we offset some of our costs with traffic citations, because I've seen texters, speeders, U-turn flippers in the middle of Solano, and to me, we can send a message to those people about the safety of our community, and we can also fund this program. So don't take my word for it. I would cordially, respectfully invite everyone here to volunteer as a crossing guard on the first day of school so that you can understand what, as a parent, I see as the biggest threat to my children in this community, which is cars and traffic. Thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate you putting this on the bill, on the agenda on the 31st.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Madam Mayor McQuaid, and good evening, City Council. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jeremiah, and good evening, everybody at home and everybody here. Appreciate you guys being here. I'd like to continue. I was unaware with the last person going to be here tonight speaking of that. I was going to speak anyway on behalf of Albany getting school zones. It's a great thing if we could just simply add the words school zones to our municipal code book. I have emails from Jerry Brown's from, gosh, going on 5 years now. I've been coming to city council meetings trying to get school zones in. And he said that all we got to do is get school zones in our municipal code book, and we'll get $100,000 a year to repaint crosswalks and push-button LED crosswalks. And also it comes with 10 paid crossing guards. And I wish we could wrap our kids up in bubble wrap and send them to school, but it's just not like that. And so the slowest speed in Albany around our schools is 25 miles an hour. I suggest 15, but maybe people are going to say 15 is too slow around our kids, but I think it's just the right thing to do. And also, I'd like to invite everybody to the Albany Giltrack Farm. It's right here on the corner. And Farmer John, he'd like to invite the City Council and would love their endorsement for this event we have coming up really soon, in about 3 months. It's the Harvest Festival on October 15th. And there's going to be nature walks, and there's going to be workshops and cinemas. There's a lot of fun things to learn. And we're going to have music, lots of fun learning opportunities. And we'd like the City Council to endorse it. And monthly, we have barbecues at the farm.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Thanks. And can you give this to City Council? This is a picture of the herb garden at the farm, and it was made in the newspaper.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hello, thank you so much for your time. My name is Rachel Sarah, and I'm the mother of 2 daughters, and I'm a homeowner in Albany. My children attend 2 different public schools in Albany, so I know how vital the crossing guards are to their safety. My youngest, who just turned 5 years old, is going to need to cross Solano and Buchanan every morning in order to get to Ocean View School, where we're hoping she'll go. We have actually made this walk the past 3 years to get to preschool. One of her preschool teachers is here. And so we have already been crossing the street between Jackson and Buchanan during the hours when actually no crossing guard has been present, because it's between the times when Beverly is there. So I've experienced myself how dangerous this intersection is without a crossing guard. People text while driving. They've been talking on their phones while driving. We have almost been hit by cars numerous times. Many, many times the light has turned green for us to cross the street on Buchanan, and drivers have tried to turn directly in front of us, and we have almost been hit. I know this city proposal would result in no crossing guard for one of the very busy intersections in Albany on the way to Ocean View, and I'm very worried about the safety of our children. So I'm asking you to please fund the crossing guard program. Thank you so much for putting this on your agenda for July 31st. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Trutane, and I'm here also to speak about the crossing guards. I deeply appreciate that University Village has helped us fund the crossing guards. My understanding, it's been a long-term thing. I think that it's been at least this way since 2009, so they have done a lot to help us with the crossing guards. And I am hoping that they can continue. I know that it was that they said they needed to back out of this after years of support, and I put a petition up on change.org, which anyone can find by going to change.org and searching Albany crossing guards. I would like to deliver that to the university and just ask them to reconsider, because I'm not sure that the people making that decision have had the on-street experience that I have had and that the other parents have had. These crossings are really dangerous, and I don't think that we can get by with just 3 guards. I will echo what Vanessa said. I think that we need to start the year with 6 guards. While we're working to find a different funding stream, we're trying to figure something out, and I am hoping that the university will rethink and find a way to help us some. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else come on it?
Good evening. My name is Rhoda Bennett. I live at 950 Cornell Avenue, Albany, California. I live right in the middle between Solano and Marin. My children went to Albany schools. My son is now 47. He started school in kindergarten long time ago. And back then, there was 2 crossing guards on Solano, and there was 2 crossing guards on Marin. There was also a crossing guard at San Pablo and Marin, and I believe that one was cut quite a while ago. And I think we should go back in the history of Albany and look at when Yu Zhang was killed crossing at San Pablo by where all this new Sprouts is right now, where there's a signal there now. When she crossed there, there was no signal. People had tried to get a signal there, and somebody couldn't afford it or didn't think it was worthwhile, and now we have a dead Yu Zhang. She wanted to be the first girl ambassador from China. Her parents had 1 child, and they probably sued Albany, and they probably sued the village for not having the stop sign there. And I just wonder how much a life is worth. And I'm here not only just to protest in disgust that they're going to cut again. I believe we had 9 crossing guards probably at that time. And then we've already cut down to what we had. Now they're going to cut down to 3. And I don't know if it's the police department that's doing this or what, but if there's 250 kids that live at the village, I think that the UC Berkeley should raise the rent on those families that live there to help fund the crossing guards. I think that's the least they can do. We provide school education for them, police department, fire department, and ambulances, and they vote for things to be raised in Albany, but they don't pay for anything. So maybe we should cut some of the stuff to them. So I'm presenting a solution tonight. I used to be a safety patrol person when I was a child, and this program is still going on. I went to 3A today. I got information for you. It's free. All we need is parents to volunteer to work with the program, and then we can protect all the schools. And this is a solution if we can't keep the crossing guards. We can protect our children, and I think they're darn worth it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Signed up 2 schools, and that's the man I talked to. He's the manager over at 3A on University Avenue.
Thank you. I'll pass that over.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Brian Parsley, Albany resident. 2 minutes, so I'll just try to make this quick and dirty. I think what we're looking at is the reality is we need a dedicated funding source if we want to continue crossing guards. In the meantime, I don't know if a stopgap would be that the school district would come forward and start to contribute maybe a third. Maybe you could talk to UC and they would rearrange their idea to do a third and the city do a third. But again, this is, something is going to come down the line that's going to happen. Somebody's going to need to pull out, and we're going to be right back where we started from. What you're going to need is either volunteers, which are frankly unreliable, or a dedicated funding source, and it's going to have to be contracted out to a company that does crossing guard duties, and many cities do that. They contract out their crossing guards. So I think, I don't think demonizing the people of the village is the way to go. Of course, you know, the village for 60 some odd years has allowed Albany Little League to use their 2 Little League fields, which are on university property, and currently also let ABGSL use the field that is on Fielding Field. In addition to that, they also bring the much needed diversity to Albany. Frankly, without that, as I've said before, we'd be a very well-meaning Piedmont. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else for public comment? That's it. Okay, seeing no one, we'll come back to council. Council member reports on meetings attended, announcements of future meetings, city manager report, and comments. I included my report on the mayor and council members' executive forum and advanced leadership workshop with the agenda. I also attended the district attorney's Justice Academy graduation. Albany High School students Evan Mala and Emma Horner, whom you see up on the board there, were participants in this 6-month learning and working experience for high school students who are interested in pursuing the study of law, justice, and social justice and the courts. And they had a graduation ceremony last week that the district attorney hosted, and it was just a really wonderful event. Also attended the Senior Center barbecue, the city's fabulous 4th of July celebration. As always, the Recreation Department did a fabulous job. We did the art dedication at Belmont Village. Vice Mayor Pilch and I went to the Mayor's Conference in Dublin. I attended the Special Olympic Torch Run, which you can see up there where the Albany police officers participated. And Councilmember Nason and I attended the Regional Task Force meeting on Alta Bates, which she's going to report on. So do you want to do that?
Sure. The task force, as we've reported before, is an organization, an informal group of elected officials from throughout northern Alameda County and also western Contra Costa County, concerned about the pending closure of Alta Bates and what that will mean, particularly for emergency department and complex birth situations, but also including the closure of the cardiology and pulmonary services that have already occurred. The hope for all of us would be to assure that we have a full service emergency department, services for potential high-risk births and other emergencies within a reasonable range. We talked earlier about economic development, and one of the things that can hamper economic development of a community is if it becomes or is perceived as a place with inadequate emergency care. The group has formed a number of subcommittees. There will be an investigation into health impact assessment. A couple of foundations have stepped forward to help review the health impact of the closures. There is discussion about actions to pursue kind of long-range planning on the assumption that Sutter Health does close Alta Bates as it currently plans to do, and what we would need to do in that scenario to assure that that emergency care and other critical care is available. And there is another committee that is looking at the overall issue of the fact that we are served in theory by a nonprofit organization, and is the governmental to private arrangement truly a fair one to the community. So those are the three principal efforts that are ongoing. And I think that's probably it.
Okay. Are there any other reports from council members?
As mentioned, we were at the mayor's conference recently together, Mayor McQuaid and I, and the East Bay Economic Development Alliance did a presentation, which is the one I forwarded to the to the rest of the council members. And I just want to say that I encourage other council members, and, as I want to do, to be more involved with their efforts and to do networking in terms of the opportunities for economic development. And the other meeting I attended was an East Bay community energy meeting back in June. I believe it's middle of June, right before I left. And the CEO for that organization was about to be chosen, but there were some issues with the candidates. But I understand the CEO has been chosen, and there will be a meeting. The next meeting is Wednesday, where we start to put more and more concrete pieces of the organization together, still with the goal of getting it up and running by spring of next year. That's it.
Great, thank you. Anything? Do we have a city manager report?
No report this evening.
Okay. All right, as we said earlier, the presentation on sea level rise has been postponed.
Whales are objecting.
I guess. What? Who's a whale? All right, that brings us to public hearing. Public hearing to consider collection of delinquent garbage bills by placement on the county tax rolls. May we have a staff report, please?
Good evening. The resolution before you confirms the annual special assessment list for delinquent residential garbage bills and authorizes the delinquent charges to be placed on the county tax rolls. For health and safety reasons, Waste Management is required to collect regular weekly residential service even if customers don't pay. So in 2013, the council passed an ordinance to authorize collection of delinquent garbage bills by placement on the Alameda County tax rolls. Accounts that were over 90 days past due in January of this year received a minimum of 4 delinquency notices from Waste Management and a final request for payment from the city, as well as a notice of this public hearing. Unpaid balances under $20 are not included on the list, and commercial properties and multifamily properties over 5 units are also not included. Once approved, the Finance Department will send the list to the county for placement on the property tax bills, and if the bill is paid in full, then the assessment will not remain on the property. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the process.
Any questions?
I guess the only question is, so this does allow us to finally get all our money then, eventually, yeah, once it comes back through the taxes?
Yes, so when it comes back to the city, we get 13.5%, which is our franchise fees, and then Waste Management will receive the rest.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll open it to public comment. Seeing none, we'll come back to council for any final comments. Can I get a motion to approve resolution 2017-61?
So moved.
Second.
Poll council, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes, and the motion carries. Okay, that brings us to 11.1, introduction of ordinance 2017-04, amending the smoking control ordinance to expressly state it regulates marijuana smoke as well as tobacco smoke, making additional clarifying revisions. May we have a staff report, please?
Okay, this item was brought forward at the council's request. It's a follow-up to the update the city council did of the no smoking ordinance back in February. At that time, the council did not specifically address marijuana smoke, and the ordinance was focused on preventing the secondary health effects from tobacco smoke. The California voters last November approved the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, which does legalize marijuana in certain circumstances. It includes a provision that states that marijuana smoking is not permitted in any areas where tobacco smoke is prohibited by local ordinance. But a member of the public wouldn't necessarily know that unless they looked up state law as well as our local ordinance. So what this does is expressly state in our local no smoking ordinance that it does cover marijuana smoke. It also makes a few other technical clarifying changes. So that's the gist of it. The staff recommendation is to waive further reading and introduce the proposed ordinance with any changes the council may think appropriate.
Are there any questions from council?
Just a request that we receive a redlined version. Yeah, I was not able to pick out what had changed accurately.
And provide that prior to a second reading. If the council wants to tweak anything, it can be taken care of at that time.
That would be okay with me.
Okay. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for final comments.
This says that the staff recommendation is that the council waive further reading. Is that?
Right. That's a technical matter. When you're approving first reading of the ordinance, instead of reading the ordinance in its entirety, you waive further reading, read the ordinance by title. It's a technical matter.
Okay. So we will have a second reading. Okay.
Okay, could I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes, and the motion carries. Any other business announcements of events? The next city council meeting will be Monday, July 31st. Jane?
I have a question about an upcoming matter, which is I gather that the Homeless Resource Center is going to be recruiting or is recruiting volunteers. How do people sign up to get involved with that? Do we know?
I will make that part of my city manager report on the 31st.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you. Bring you that information.
And with that, we are adjourned.